Coming up, we break down the tie that we all anticipated the New York Football Giants and Washington Commanders playing to on Sunday. What does it all mean for the playoffs? What were the key sequences? How frustrated are we with the Giants from a coaching staff, player, execution? The whole McGillicuddy is getting broken down next. Yes, friends, it's OGP, the One Giant Podcast, where, of course, we are your host over here, Adam Armbrecht over there, Andy Makowitz. No time for the BS, Andrew, because we are talking about the New York Football Giants 20-20 tie against the Washington Commanders. How are you, sir? You were at the stadium yesterday. I'm sure it was a playoff intensity level atmosphere right after everyone recovered from Daniel Jones fumbling and Washington going up early in this one.
Yeah, I mean, I'm at the concession stand making sure I have a cold beverage refreshment ready to go, and as I'm walking to my seats, helmet, hat on a ball, fumbled Daniel Jones, and the most frustrating part was he started moving the ball well with his legs early on. You're like, oh, this is gonna be the Daniel Jones show. Like, this is great. Like, he's moving the ball effectively. Then next play, fumble, Washington football. Luckily, they only got 3 points out of that one. They come down and get 7 more after that. It's 10-0 in a blink of an eye, and you're like, what's happening here?
You better believe it, man. And listen, we'll start with some of the frustrating things just along the way. I'm going to drop little nuggets in as we cover some of the key sequences that Andy was watching from the stadium. I'm watching from home. So you kind of get these two perspectives around it. I'll tell you one thing right off the bat. First of all, and again, I had this thought in real time. It's not a hat. It's not a helmet on the ball. The guy just punches it right out of Daniel Jones's hands. It's a bad fumble. Doesn't protect the football. However, two parts to it. One, Daniel Jones has had very few moments over the course of this season where I've said bad play on him, right? Like just on him, his fault. So I'm not even going to harp on it. What I will harp on is the fact that the New York Football Giants throughout this game were trying to have Daniel Jones run between the tackles seemingly to pick up yardage. And I love Daniel Jones' legs, and I love utilizing some of his best assets, but that is not the way that I'd be using them. Like, you put him in a really bad situation there saying, why don't you go ahead and just cover that thing up, squirt between the offensive line. Just watch out for the defensive linemen and the linebackers and maybe even a safety coming down at you who are all going to be looking to punch that thing out. Like, that was tip of the iceberg things that were frustrating me. As we start to get into this game, though, which 10-0, all of a sudden you're thinking, good gravy. Like, what is about to maybe happen here? The Giants respond. The Giants get back on track. They have good offensive possessions. You said Daniel Jones uses his legs very effectively in this game, and you end up finding yourself at halftime, and we can talk about everything that led up to that you maybe watched from the stadium, but you end up 13-13, and you think, you know what? We got ourselves back to neutral, and that's kind of all you really wanted after the way this game started.
Yeah, 100%. You're down 10-0. You're thinking to yourself, let's get back into this game. Let's make it competitive. And you look up at halftime and it's 13-13. It's a tie ball game. And you're thinking, all right, we clawed out of that early hole. We feel like we're getting a good run of the game so far. Saquon Barkley, 13-yard touchdown run. Place was electric when he scored. Everyone went nuts. Everyone was excited. And you felt like you had a real opportunity to win this game going into the second half. And the Giants go down and they score again and go up 20-13 out of halftime. And you're sitting here saying the Giants have this game by the horns. All they have to do is close it. And the Giants just could not do it, Adam.
Yeah, this was a big problem for me when we're talking about this game because 13-13, you mentioned going into halftime. And I just want to we'll kind of tie in here a little bit about Daniel Jones, a little about Barkley, because I don't think so much that these sequences or these specific players' individual performances are going to come into effect as we talk about the game overall. Daniel Jones, I remember at one point early in this game saying, well, the guy's doing pretty damn good for himself, 6 for 6 for 71 yards. And then as you got towards halftime, you looked up and you said, so he's thrown for 80 yards. It's that kind of stereotypical performance. You mentioned the touchdown from Barkley. It's another game, though, where 18 for 63. It just doesn't look like he's able to get himself going necessarily. And then you get to that point. In the second half, the Giants come out, they get the touchdown. And by the way, these are two sequences of over in the course of the second half here. Giants get that score, then it comes down. They get the turnover, strip sack. I want to highlight how good Azeez Ojulari looked in this one. Big play from Kayvon Thibodeau late in this game too, down in the as Washington backed up against their own end zone. Like, you can see these little seeds of success that are being planted here. Giants converted the turnover to 7 points. Washington only to 3. Like, it all felt right. And then the Giants come out up 7 after shutting down Washington. I said, this is the moment, man. Go out, put a scoring drive, field goal, more than enough. Put a field goal on the board, more than enough to feel like you've really put Washington in a hard spot, and this defense and wing can start to get aggressive. And they don't. And they just don't. Like, they don't find a way. They put that ball right back to Washington, I think within 4 or 5 plays. I don't have the exact sequences down, but there was that sense of like, man, neither team is going to take this thing and do anything with it that makes you feel like it's not going to maybe end up coming down to a tie of some kind.
It was frustrating beyond belief. And Adam, the Commanders had more yards. They had more time of possession. They had more first downs. They had more of a lot of things. But it felt like this was the Giants' game to lose. Like, it never felt like Washington was in control of this game. And I'm going to go through a couple of things while I'm sitting there in the stadium watching this. This is my train of thought. We go up 20-13. I'm thinking I predicted the Giants would win 23-13. All the Giants had to do was go down and get one more field goal, and the game was over. Literally, it would have been over. 2 possessions. Washington was not coming back from that. And I remember I'm sitting there, and John Feliciano gets a taunting penalty when the Giants are in field goal range, ready to salt this game away. Giants don't end up getting more yardage, and they have to punt. That, to me, was the first one where I kind of just scratched my head being like, here was the first opportunity for us to put the nail in the coffin, and we couldn't do it.
Yeah, I think a lot of these moments are going to be talked about here. Again, I watched it from home. Everybody was lambasting. You can't do it. You can't do that penalty there, et cetera. Now, you're only highlighting it as, hey, here's one of the first key moments that impacts the way this game script goes. I am very pro putting it on the player when they do something like that solicits a somewhat, penalty that you can avoid, is the point. And Feliciano has always been an aggressive player since he's come to the Giants this season. And there's been, I think, a couple other moments we've taken them. He charges up the field excited to pick up his guy. He steps past the Washington Commanders player and then does the big flex. Again, should he just not do it? Fine, you want to say that. But that literally is grabbing every player in the NFL and sucking the joy out of their souls while playing a sport. He's not doing it at anybody. He flexes going forward up the field. It's a bad call. It's a bad call. It's a bad penalty call. I understand you could avoid it, but it's not the right call. It wasn't a taunting penalty. It wasn't at anybody. It shouldn't have happened. And still, it ends up extending the drive for the Washington Commanders, and it ends up putting them in a position to tie this game and make it look a lot different.
Yeah, I mean, the troubling part is, just for context purposes, the Giants had it 1st and 10 on the Washington 47. Daniel Jones has a pass over to Darius Slayton for 12 yards. The Giants are at the 35-yard line of the Washington Commanders with only a handful of minutes left on the clock, up 7. You're actually kicking in where the wind is going for Graham Gano. He said he's right. I'm good from almost 60 on that side. So you're at the 35-yard line. You have the field goal in hand, and all of a sudden you get that penalty. It was crushing to me because I knew at that moment, I'm like, uh-oh, this was our first chance to put the game away, and we couldn't do it.
Oh, 100%, right? So let's just think back here a little bit, because I want to remember, I'm trying to find these sequences here. The fumble obviously comes just 3 plays into the second half for Washington. The Giants come down and score that. They convert it into 5 plays, 20 yards, touchdown. I'm trying to find here. There it was. So 11 plays, 38 yards for Washington, and then they punt. The Giants turn around and they go 3 plays, 9 yards, punt. Then you follow that up. 12 plays, 40 yards, missed field goal for Washington. We almost forget they had a missed field goal this game. Giants follow it up. 3 plays minus 5 yards, punt. Washington, 3 plays, negative yards, punt the ball away. Giants, 4 plays, punt, negative yards. Touchdown for Washington now ties it. And then we get to the 3 plays here that end up being, and then another punt. So we have a sequence here where the Giants leading into it, you are talking about 1, 2, 3, 4 opportunities after being up 20-13 that the Washington Commanders gave you the ball back leading, and you couldn't put anything on the board. Like, this is where we come to coaching, and we've talked about how much we've highlighted and loved what Dable and Kafka and Wink Martindale have done all year long. This is your chance to win the game. And that sequence with Feliciano, that's mixed in there. But you have so many opportunities to make it really hard. And what we talked about coming into it, Taylor Heineke in this game, man, he ends up throwing for 275 yards, has 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. He has a worse QBR rating in this game than Daniel Jones did, which we'll talk about in a second. But he wasn't like, you're begging to be up by 10 and have Taylor Heineke lob one up and get an interception, force another turnover, have him hold the ball too long, like you highlighted coming into this game, get another sack fumble, and they just can't do it. Like, that to me is so much more important than all these other moments, which were brutal and we're going to talk about. But you had four cracks at the apple to put this one away, and you couldn't do it.
Yeah, so we mentioned that Feliciano penalty. That was the first thing in my mind. I was like, that was the first one where you're like, uh-oh. The second one is the Washington Commanders get the ball back with about 3.5 minutes to go. And you're like, okay, this is it. This is where we have to make one stop. We got to get a big play from Kayvon Thibodeau or Azeez Ojulari. We have to get a stop. And it's 4th and 4, and Taylor Heineke's scrambling all over the place in his own territory at his own 20-yard line. And I put my hands up. I'm like, that's it. This is the game. And he just floats this ball up in the air and picks up the first down. And that was the next moment where I was like, we just let them get away with another one, Adam. And guess what? They go on an 8-play, 90-yard drive to tie up the game. That was huge. Our offense had an opportunity. We had the mistake by Feliciano. Our defense has one opportunity to say, hold them to, just stop them. Get one stop, and this game is over right here, right now. And the Giants couldn't do it. That's the second point where I looked around and I said, we're giving this game away.
Yeah, and is it now? I'm pretty sure here, and this was end of regulation sequence because we were talking pre-show.
It's like a blur, right?
So many, I died so many, yeah. Because every time I thought I had like, hey, these are the 2 or 3 things that really whatever. I'm like, well, now here's 3 or 4 or 5 things. So Washington scores there. The Giants have the ball, and they only possess it for 28 seconds before ending up giving it to Washington, and then this one does ultimately go to overtime. 3 plays though. I could not believe, and I know you want to talk about also the possibility of going for it on the 4th down sequence too. But I am someone who said, listen, at some point, you need to put the record aside and you need to focus on making sure you're evaluating players, evaluating Daniel Jones. And I did say he had a 31.8 QBR in this game. That is his 3rd worst QBR of the entire season, only threw for 200 yards. And it all kind of, it's all relative to if the team wins or loses and what the game script is, etc. But not a great game for him overall. And actually, it felt in contrast to what my eye was telling. I mostly thought Daniel Jones was playing well. However, 3 plays when I'm like, you know what? I've been begging for this team. Push the ball downfield. And then I found myself disagreeing with the fact that they throw one over the middle to Darius Slayton. It's a tough catch. He should come down with it. He said as much. I'm not going to put it as, oh, Darius Slayton with another big drop. They don't make that catch, though. He then tries to throw one down the sideline to Darius Slayton. Everyone's complaining, should have been pass interference. The ball is also thrown a little bit 2 yards behind and on the inside. There's a world where the Commanders defender turns around and just catches the ball very easily. Not a great throw, not a great sequence, could have been pass interference. And by the way, all these things I know we can sit here and say, if he catches it, if they call PI, the Giants win the game. Great, it didn't happen. Then the 3rd pass is a laser into quadruple coverage from Daniel Jones that hits a Commander in the hands and could have been picked off going the other direction, and who knows what happens. The point being, man, yeah, I want them to stretch the field, and all you ended up doing was giving Washington one more opportunity to go win the game in regulation. The weirdness of desperation of the closing sequences compared to what you're going to talk about, maybe not going for it on a 4th down when you think you could have had a chance to win it.
Yeah, so that possession was number 3. So I have the Feliciano penalty sticks in my mind. And then the defense not being able to get a stop. They have an 8-play, 90-yard drive was number 2. I'm like, man, we're giving this thing away. We have this.
Yep.
Darius Slayton is wide open on that throw. And Daniel Jones is throwing from the end zone that I am in. I am watching the ball go up in the air, and I'm like, oh, baby. Like, we're about to salt this game away. And I'll be honest. I've looked at some of the replays. Obviously, it was a little high, but Darius Slayton has 2 hands on the ball in front of, and he admitted, to your point, he admitted, he's like, I need to catch that ball. If he catches that ball, we are in the Commanders' territory. We are kicking a field goal and we are winning that football game. I have no doubt in my mind. And so it's so frustrating. Like, oh, if he could just hold on to that. The next play, they go take another shot. Richie James along the sideline. I've never heard more boos from MetLife Stadium than when they did not call the pass interference, because you can clearly see that the defender is pushing Richie James out of bounds. And everyone in the stadium is expecting to see the laundry come on the field. The flag gets thrown, and it doesn't. And at that point, you're sitting there, you're like, uh-oh, we're about to give this ball back to the Commanders. And to your point, Daniel Jones tries to throw one into quintuple coverage over the middle. And you could just tell that the Giants were really trying to force something there, being like, we didn't waste that. We didn't take enough time off the clock. We're going to give it back to the Commanders. What are we doing? That one felt like it was a forced decision from Daniel Jones. But again, that was number 3 for me in terms of the Giants can put this thing to bed if any of these different things happen. And of course, 3 and out gets back to Washington. Not a good situation for the Giants.
Yeah, and I mean, listen, when you go and you look at it, Terry McLaurin, I text you, man, that's the kind of guy you'd love to have on it. You see a bit of the contrast here. And by the way, McLaurin actually had a drop in a bit of a key moment for their team as well. It's like these are part of the game. 8 for 105 in the touchdown for McLaurin on 12 targets, 6 for 90 with a 55 long on 8 targets for Darius Slayton. Isaiah Hodgins steps up in a big way, 5 for 44, gets the touchdown. Great route combination, great throw, everything done perfectly. Like, there are a lot of really nice moments in this game. And when this thing ends up in a tie, I almost go, yeah, I don't think either one of you deserved it. It's like, I don't think either team really deserved to win the game, because I even said to you when we were texting a little bit at the stadium, which I always do think is a very poor it's a very poor process on my end, because you're at the stadium, like you're fully engaged in it, and I'm like, ping, you want to just look, just take your eyes off the action, just look down for 1 second. And I would say 65% of 70% of my texts are timely and about what's happening, but I get distracted. Now I'm making comments about what I'm doing next Wednesday. I'm thinking about maybe brunch for everybody to get together. So I really got to be a little more focused there. But it is just that thing of both teams. I thought Riverboat Ron might go for it after they scored when it was 19-20. I was like, won't be shocked if Riverboat Ron says we're going for the win right here. And that does bring us to, I think, but I want to get any other big takeaways from this game. But then it does bring us to a very interesting point that we get to at the end of this game, which you said you experienced in real time with the entire Giants fan base up there in North Jersey.
Yeah, so game goes to overtime, tied 20-20, and there's a couple punts back and forth. Nothing's really happening. Washington, got it to midfield. You thought that they were going to be able to put the game away. They couldn't. They punted to the Giants.
I forgot. This is your most frustrating part.
Yep. Well, and the Giants get the ball at their own 14-yard line with just over 4 minutes to go, and you say, here it is. This is going to be the drive. If the Giants are going to be successful and make the playoffs this year, we need to see it from Jones. And Jones was able to move the ball pretty effectively. He hit Saquon Barkley. He had a couple of runs up the middle. He had a couple of different passes to Daniel Bellinger that opened up some things over the middle. Things were looking great. And Adam,
let me just real quick. I want to just hit it so we have it. Jones over the middle to Richie James for 14 yards, gets to Washington's 43. No huddle, Daniel Jones spikes the ball. 2nd and 10, pass short right to Bellinger, Washington's 40-yard line, 3-yard pickup. Then it's an incomplete pass short to the right, and then they set themselves up for that field goal. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, that was the
40,
last.
That was
the last drive of the game. The one before that, the Giants were driving the ball down the field.
Oh yeah, the 7 play, yep. 36 yards.
Yep. And so they get it to the Washington Commander 45-yard line. You're like, man, going this way, Gano probably needs another 10 yards, so we have to pick up a first down. All of a sudden, the Giants have a couple of tough plays, incomplete passes. The Giants have the ball 4th and 3 on the Washington Commander 45-yard line. And everyone in the stadium is saying they got to go for it. Like, this is the defining moment of the season. They need to go for it, pick up the first down, because if you pick up that first down, essentially you're saying we're going to have one opportunity to kick a field goal at some point, and Washington can't do anything about it. The Giants end up bringing the offense back out on the field, and they do the fake snap delay of game penalty to give more room for the punter. And the place was booing. Adam, nobody was happy with the call. It felt like that was one of those momentum pieces where you're like, if you trust your offense, if you trust your quarterback, if you trust your running back, you make the decision to go for it there. There's a 0% chance that Tom Brady or Patrick Mahomes or any truly established quarterback lets their coach take the ball out of their hands in that moment. They say,
So
I am
okay,
going to win this game. And you could just tell the Giants didn't have confidence that their offense could pick up those 3 yards, and they punted away to the chagrin and boo of everyone in the stadium.
well, okay. So here's my thing, because when I watched it in real time and I saw them and they actually did shift, like you saw the shifting off. They were shifting wide receivers. The tight end moved in the backfield. So initially when they lined up, because you can a lot of times you feel like you're like they're not going for it. Like the
No,
formation.
everyone thought they
No,
were
no,
going
that's
for
what I
it. With
mean.
that shift, you're like, they're in.
I was
Let's
like,
do
hold
this.
on now. Now they're setting up to run a real play here, and then they
Yes.
don't. So to your point, there was a conflict inside my body of like, all right, you're going for it. Here we go. What I will say is, I see, like, I didn't, the last part you mentioned there about Patrick Mahomes, Tom Brady, the best in the league, they're not letting the coach take the ball out of their hands. That might be true. I don't necessarily look at this in that same way of like, you have to go for it here. You have to take the game in your hands and go win it. You're at the 45. And I get that you're right there. But we were talking about this pre-show, and I'm not even playing devil's advocate. It didn't bother me as much as I would understand why the entire stadium. You're at the game. It's been a frustrating game. You haven't come through. You should have buried this team. It should be 30-20 right now, right? All of those things I think play as much an emotional role as anything else. But if you drop back, you're not going to run the ball there because Saquon Barkley has not been good. The offensive line has not been productive. So now you're talking about, are you going to put the ball in Daniel Jones' hands and you're going to maybe move him outside the pocket? His legs have been effective, 71 yards. So you can kind of think on how easy, quote unquote, it may have been to pick up those 3 yards. But what if the snap gets muffed? What if he doesn't get outside the pocket? What if they bring a heavy blitz package and he loses 4 or 5 yards, even an incomplete? To put the ball into Washington's hands at the 45-yard line and say, hey, you are 20 yards away from kicking a field goal to win this game. Now that this gets to the point of, are you playing for the win or are you playing for the tie? And the spot where I can agree with the frustration is that but moments ago in the fourth quarter, you were playing to win the game and seemingly making me pull my hair out because your decision to do that was followed up by such a very interesting collection of plays that didn't involve taking anything off the clock. It wasn't mildly conservative. It was all out, no wasting time, put the ball back into Washington's hands and maybe lose the game in regulation. Now, if you're comfortable with that risk, you can be, but I find it's very interesting that then you get to overtime. It's only 5 yards difference of field position, and you end up going with a very conservative approach, thinking, hey, I guess if we get to overtime, it gives a chance. And guess what? If they gain 5 or 6 more yards in overtime and the Graham Gano field goal is good, then it all kind of does make sense. The result impacts how you look at the process.
You hit the nail on the head of why I was so frustrated when they punted the ball, Adam. It's because
They're
in
schizophrenic.
regulation, they're telling you we are going to try and win this game. They're
Yeah.
launching deep balls to Darius Slayton. They're launching deep balls to Richie James. They're having Daniel Jones throwing a triple coverage. And then it's 4th and 3, and you can literally get a stranglehold on the game
Yeah.
and you punt for a tie. Like,
Yep.
to me, that was the tough part is like, Brian Daboll, Mike Kafka, I'm with you. Like, you want to air it out to Darius Slayton. If that's the strategy, you want to be aggressive, you want to go win this game. We are here. We're all pushing our chips into the center of the table, right? And then all of a sudden in overtime, it's like, well, we have a chance to win it, but let's try to pin them deep with under 2 minutes left with not all of our timeouts. And if Washington doesn't throw an incompletion and fumble the ball out of bounds, like the Giants don't even get the opportunity to get the ball back. That was poor management by Washington. But basically, when you're punting the ball away with 1:40 left in overtime, you're basically saying, we're comfortable here with a tie. And it just didn't sit well with me based on how they had played the other portion of the game earlier.
Yeah, and I'll throw in like, hey, you're comfortable thinking that your defense, which was building momentum over the course of this game, and not even at regulation. Yeah, we're not worried about 1:40, but we're also not worried about We'll go to overtime, even if we don't get the ball first. Our defense, we feel like they can get the stop, and then our offense gets a chance to reset itself and not have a 4th and 3 from the 45, be at the 40, be at the 35, right? Be going in towards the end zone. And obviously, you also have to realize that these are teams that were tied 13 apiece at halftime, and you put up a combined 14 points in the second half. So there's a lot of elements to it of being like, you can think that you can go do this thing, but also some things have to tell you that maybe it's not going to be the most likely outcome. And it comes down to, and we've talked about this, if you flipped where the record was, if they had some of the other wins later in the season, not at the beginning, if the Giants were sitting here at, well, not, 4-7-1 instead of 7-4-1. If that was reversed, they do go for it there. And this has always been my contention around these decisions. Like, and you and I debate them all the time. And I think it's mostly fun. If they work, they do. If they don't, it's horrible, whatever. But whatever your conviction of the season was, which has been from Joe Shane to Brian Daboll down, they've always seemed to say this is an evaluation. It's 1 week at a time. We're not going to get over our skis on this one. Hey, long way to go here. It feels like you all of a sudden got caught up in the playoffs. Like, the playoffs might be on the table here, and then do we not want to risk it? And while maybe you wouldn't have gotten that the 4th and 3, the fan base, and I think we would talk about it a lot differently and just say, hey, you took your shot, you missed it. They lose in regulation. You tried. You went for it. It didn't work out. Okay. And now what does it look like for the playoffs? What does it mean for the season? What does it mean going forward? But hey, I would have loved one more moment with the ball in Daniel Jones' hand, because as we know, I'm a guy that says I want to see more and more from him in this season. That was a great opportunity for a defining moment of his season, maybe for his career. And to your point, you do take that ball out of his hands.
It's frustrating too. After the Giants get the ball back, Kayvon Thibodeau has a sack on the 1 yard line. It's like Taylor Heinicke never sees him coming. That ball could pop out, and the Giants win the game. And Kayvon is the hero of New York City, right? Like it was inches away from him fumbling that ball. But we get the ball back. We try to do a couple of moves. The play calling was pretty questionable with plays inbounds with limited amount of time. We talked about this off the show.
Very quickly. You get down there, you have an opportunity. You on first down, you run a design. There was nothing else on the table. Draw play run for Daniel Jones. Inbounds, get up, spike the ball. Then you throw an inbounds play pass across the middle of the field. And then inexplicably, the third play you run is another play where you know for a fact the clock is going to run on you. And then they don't even take a shot. They don't even take a whisper of a look. Oh man, that was sorry.
It was very frustrating. And then, Graham Gano trying to kick a 58-yarder. He asked that Daboll had asked him earlier, what's your range from here? He said it's probably 53 into the wind. I can't hit it further. Daboll still put him out there because it's either that or chuck it to the end zone. Obviously, it comes up well short. And everyone in the stadium kind of looked around and was like, so a tie? What? Like, Adam, can you help me understand more what a tie means for the Giants playoff hopes? Because as a very simple fan that I am, I'm like, a win helps us get to the playoffs. A loss, probably not so good. What the heck does a tie do?
Well, listen, when you look over in the wild card spectrum, the Giants stood pat. They didn't go anywhere. They stayed in the 6th seed. Obviously, Dallas went on to win later against the Colts yesterday. Seattle, who won, pushed up to 7th, and Washington standing pat, with a tie, they actually dropped down to 8th. So they're now on the bubble on the outside looking in. The first thing is, a tie is better than a loss, because now you're talking about percentage points when it comes to records. So you could win the game. That's ideal. You could lose the game. That's horrific. And you can tie it, which just kind of maybe pushes the timeline of what can go right or wrong here for the Giants a little bit further down the road. Now, on Sunday as well, though, when you go and look at the NFL schedule, I mentioned Seattle there. They come out. They get the win, 27-23 over the Rams. That is very significant in this. There are a couple other things that really mattered. And I'm going to throw out the fact that Green Bay won. We can say, who cares? We, at the minimum, have the tiebreaker, so you can push that to the side. The Detroit Lions also won. And you may be laughing off the Detroit Lions, but they have the tiebreaker against the Giants. And that kind of does at least keep them in the conversation, because they're 9th right now in the playoff picture. So there's a couple of things that I want to break down here. The first one is, interestingly enough, the other game where San Francisco played and beat Miami 33-17, but lost Jimmy Garoppolo for the year. So I was going through all these things in my mind of, boy, well, now Seattle might actually be able to catch San Francisco over the back end of this season, which would actually be a good thing for the Giants, because Seattle has the tiebreaker against the Giants. So over these next couple of games, these percentage points are going to matter in a big way. 7-5 right now for Seattle. If the Giants lose a game, if the Giants in Seattle finish with 8 wins, finish with 9 wins, and by the way, it's going to be really hard for the Giants to get to 9 full wins now, potentially. But if Seattle gets to 8 wins, they're going on the percentage points. However, now that the Giants have the tie in their bag, they will have a percentage better winning record than a team that is 9-8. If the Giants are 8-1, they're maybe going to be able to get over that hump. That was a bad example because it'll be 500 there, but there's going to be spectrums where the Giants can actually benefit from having this tie in their pocket. The curiosity becomes how these records play out for other teams, like Detroit. Detroit has 4 games, man. I went and looked at where they were standing right now. When you look at the rest of their schedule, they can win 3 out of their last 5 games. And if they go and do that and they get to 8 wins, the Giants are in a very tight spot playing on the fringe. It's still going to come down to that game against Washington in 2 weeks. But I did tell you there's a world where the Giants can lose that game and still find their way to the playoffs.
Yeah, after breaking it all down, you realize that the tie isn't actually the worst thing in the world for the Giants from a playoff perspective, because to your point, head to head, Seattle has beaten us, right? So that means if we had the identical record as the Seattle Seahawks, we would be going home. But now this
Seattle would
tie
have jumped
means
they would have jumped to Washington and us and put themselves in that 6th spot, and we'd be hanging on to the final wild card.
right. So if the playoffs started today, the Giants are in because of that tie, which
Yep.
I found fascinating to think about, and said, okay, the tie isn't the worst thing in the world. If the Giants would have lost that game, they would technically not be in the playoffs right now if it started today. So think of it in that vein. To your point, now with the Giants having this tie, Adam, they need to win 2 games in order to get into the playoffs. They have to get to 9 wins to have a shot, because to your point, Seattle's going to get to 8. The Lions are going to get to 8. The Giants need to get to 9 wins in order to have a chance. And we talk about how many games are left on the schedule. They got 2 with Philly. They've got the Vikings. They've got the Colts. And they've got the Commanders. They have to find a way to get to two more wins. I think at that point, 9 wins with a tie gives the Giants a really good chance to make the playoffs.
Yeah, now again, you can get to 9 wins and still have lost to the Washington Commanders in 2 weeks, and then it won't matter because you'll have lost the tiebreaker to them potentially. And then the other one I just want to drill down and remind people of is, again, with San Francisco. So losing their starting quarterback for the rest of the year, their second starting quarterback in a lot of ways. The rest of their season is at home for Tampa Bay. They go to Seattle. They have Washington at home, and then the Raiders and the Cardinals to close out the year. They still have very winnable games in there, but if you're a Giants fan, you'd like to see Seattle get that division title, because if in any world, and San Francisco already has a record that suggests they're going to, limp their way. They're 8-4. They can limp their way to a 9th win here over the remainder of the season. You'd think they're going to get to 10 because that defense is so effing good. Like, they're not just built on Jimmy G. However, if they get to that 9th win and Seattle overtakes them, well, the Giants can get to 9, and then you can get into some little compartmentalized, things, splitting of hairs. You want the teams the Giants have gone head-to-head with and lost to not to be a part of the equation. So you hope that Seattle can overtake them, but there's a very razor-thin line here where Seattle and 49ers are kind of playing hard against one another. Like, one more win for the 49ers and have it not be against Seattle. Like, it's so confusing about what you're going to be hoping and wishing for here. It's become a lot more muddled. And it's really hard, man. Eagles are next up for the Giants. Like, I don't know. Like, how are we supposed to feel? We can say, I'll tee you up for this, Andy. At the end of the day, how do you come out of this game, tie and all, feeling about the Giants and specifically making the playoffs? And I don't just mean from the tie. I mean all the way top to bottom, coaching and everything else involved. Are you more confident the team is going to make the playoffs? Or are you sitting here kind of saying, like, yeah, maybe we're back where we were when we started this year? Just kind of looking and saying wins, maybe not, but it's all about evaluation.
This tie amplifies the rematch against the Washington Commanders in 2 weeks. It basically means the season will rely on that game, because if the Giants lose to the Commanders, they are not making the playoffs. We can safely say that, because then the Giants would have to basically win out, because to your point, Washington would have the tiebreaker. Seattle would have the tiebreaker. The Lions would have the tiebreaker, right? Like, everyone has a tiebreaker if we lose to the Commanders.
And Washington has a bye week. So if the Giants lose to the Eagles this upcoming week, they will drop and Washington will elevate into a wild card position by default, because they'll have the top. Right now will be even keeled. And that was the other. Oh, I forgot about this one just real quick. The divisional record matters here too. The Giants haven't won a division game. So the divisional record is a problem. Remember, Washington beat Philadelphia a few weeks ago. So now that tiebreaker, which is the first thing you're going to go to after the records in the head-to-head, that's also why the Giants are probably not going to be able to afford to be gridlocked with Washington, because they'll lose it on the divisional record, because there's a world where the Giants don't win a single divisional game this year.
Yeah.
Something else to think about.
Basically, this tie to me puts less importance on the Eagles game that's upcoming and everything on the Commanders game in 2 weeks. And it's tough to look ahead in your schedule, but we know just based on all these numbers and odds now, figuring out this tie situation, the Giants need to beat the Commanders to make the playoffs. Obviously, getting a bonus win against a potential Super Bowl team like the Eagles would be huge for the Giants, but we know that in 2 weeks, that game, basically this tie has doubled down the importance of that game. The Giants need to go on the road in the division and get a win in order for them to make the playoffs.
San Francisco will be the game after the Giants rematch for the Washington Commanders. That one takes a little bit of a different look on here now after the injury for Jimmy G for Washington, and then Cleveland, and then Dallas. So, man, there's so much to watch for here. We have 4 more days to discuss it this week, but it was a whirlwind, man. This is fully back into every single snap and every single down. And I think that this first game, albeit a tie, really amplified how 2 games, their entire season, all the wins, all the pageantry, all the big games from Saquon Barkley, who went over 1,000 yards in this game for the season, all of it, 2 games. That's all that it's going to end up coming down to. We'll continue to break this down throughout the week. You get us over on YouTube, comment. I know, talk about how I ate up so much time over the course of this episode, just raging on about different things. That's the way it was, man. It was an intense game to watch from home, equally, if not 1,000 times more intense to watch at the stadium. Get us on the podcast feed, wherever you get those needs fulfilled. We'll be back again tomorrow, breaking down this, the injuries, and so much more for the New York Football Giants. And as Andy Makowitz would want, need, and nay, demand the people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.